Kuf Amud Aleph, Amud Beis, 100b. We get to an interesting topic here, and I have my trusty Steinsaltz because it's going to be a lot of fun Aramaic writing, poetic Aramaic writing. So I'm not so good at Aramaic. Poetic Aramaic is definitely not going to be much better. And the reason for that is because we're going to be introduced into one of these anomaly books that are referred to in the Gemara, but didn't really make it down, at least not in its entirety, to us. And the reason, we'll find out momentarily. Namely, so the line begins with the word tzadikim, bit tzadikim, lakabel tevasan, a colon, 2 dots, and then Rabbi Akiva Omer. It's about 10 lines from the top or something like that. Okay. So Rabbi Akiva Omer, afakoy besvarim mechutzanim. It's in between 2 colons. So this is a quote from the Mishnah, the Brisa, I'm sorry. My Brisa, the Mishnah. The Mishnah, which stated, enlisting those who don't have a share in the world to come, as we discussed a number of times here. And one of the types of people on the list are those who read in external books. That's literally what the translation means. From the halachic perspective, this means that one is not allowed to read books that describe the philosophy and rites of idol worship. That's the basic halachic meaning. He's reading heretical information. It's actually more than just heresy. Reading heresy is one thing, philosophical heresy is one thing. This is reading specifically idol worship, meaning reading that which questions the existence of the divine is one level of a problem. But here, from a halachic perspective, it's specifically talking about that which is paganistic idol worship. And it becomes a little bit of a problem in some schools, even here in Quebec, or maybe starting here in Quebec, where the government imposes you reading books about doing projects and books on religions that incorporate elements of idolatry. Becomes a bit of an issue, but nonetheless, this is the Gemara.
What if you worship the almighty dollar?
Can
you read financial books?
Yeah. There are different caveats to this. Like, for example, someone who's this is not a halachic statement I'm about to make, but if I remember correctly, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there are caveats. For example, someone who's a Rav and has to make rulings on what is and isn't idol worship is allowed to read certain elements of the idol worship just to understand. In other words, someone comes to me and says, "Rabbi, is this philosophy an idol worship? How is he supposed to know it or not if he doesn't read about it?" Essentially.
Purpose.
Yeah, but it's only a certain person who's reached a certain amount of scholarship, and if he's a certain level, and so there's all kinds of caveats.
On the other hand, there's also like those who are deprogramming people who join cults. So they have to know what the cult does in order to bring them back.
Yeah.
Again, it's not for everybody as well. Like the Jews for Jews for
a number of times they've told people not to engage in discourse with Jews for J. Is start arguing about what the verse means and what the verse doesn't mean, and they're going to start quoting from their book, and you don't know what you're talking about. And it's not your business to know what their books have to say. But there were certain exceptions, most notably by Shachat from Toronto, Olav Shalom, Emmanuel Shachat, who is the forefront of fighting Jews for J. So it's clear from his talks that he was quite familiar with their writings and knew how to dismantle it from. He knew how to dismantle it from within.
Exactly. Especially to get Jews back, it's a question of big
definition. But generally speaking, this is the halacha. One should not read books of idol worship. Okay.
Know thine enemy.
Exactly.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah.
I also mentioned like too much last exactly because more so at the time Sanhedrin they have to know of Razor because a case comes before him.
That's right. That's what I was saying.
Yeah, you have to know.
So a Rav who's at the level where he's delineating law and what is and what isn't idol worship has to know these things. Okay.
And today's a very practical example with the shaitels from India. There was one case for what is a Vodazor, what's not a Vodazor.
Yeah.
And also the question about yoga was one is that the different levels. I'm not going to make a halachic decision. It's like it's interesting.
Yoga.
Oh, yoga.
Had its origins in Eastern meditative religions.
Right.
Also, and the Eastern religions are much more complicated to deal with, but we'll leave that alone for now.
Yoga groups in synagogues, for example, some do allow it.
If you want, if you want to understand a little bit more of that, you can read a great book by Rabbi Akiva Tatz in South Africa, who wrote. I read it a long time ago, and I think the title is "Letters to a Buddhist Jew." And it's an exchange of letters between him and a Jew who's involved in Buddhism, and he goes through discussing that stuff. Interesting. So you can, over there you're reading about Buddhism from a Jewish lens. I don't know, you're not reading it through the lens of their writings, but through the lens of Judaism. So it's an interesting read.
Enough to mean actually the wine, for example.
Sorry?
The wine of the
Yeah, Nesach.
Yeah, is it like Ishmael versus a church and other beliefs? Is it considered a what is or not? Like Buddha, for example, if Buddhist touches the wine, that's the question.
Yeah.
Okay. Shtia and Hanan and so on.
All right. So something more like this. Tana, we've learned that when we say Sfarim Chitzonim, external books, where we just said the halacha is talking about idol worship, the Mishnah add that B'Sifrei Tzedukim. This brisa, this text would include books of the Sadducees. Of course, the Sadducees are Jews who broke away from traditional Judaism in that they accepted the validity and divinity of the written Torah, but rejected the oral Torah, the oral tradition of the modes of interpretation of the books themselves. Like the Mishnah, which interprets the books of the Torah itself. So reading their books, in and of it would also be counted as external books. Ironically,
I put like maybe to censor, maybe you had in mind really the church, like Medium and Galachim.
Where are you reading from?
In the Haggadah Tzitzanim in Zion.
That's interesting.
But
before the censor means
you can't really call them they're not idolaters at all, but because they believe in Hashem. Just because Rashi over here,
they're not idolaters, but they're deniers in the validity of Torah, which we mentioned before. One of the things.
He translation should call for Bekelchai. They don't deny Hashem. They have their wrong belief. But the church is the problem with the Trinity.
Right.
So that's why there could be. This was a very sensitive issue and had to kind of like.
Yeah, that's possible.
Because I know, like the New Testament, for example, is considered to be like that.
Sorry.
The New Testament considered this category, unless sometimes
for sure.
Yeah.
Sure. The New Testament would be idol worship. It refers to a human being as God.
Exactly. That's the problem. And the Trinity as well.
Okay. And lacks in, but that's another topic. We once talked about this, in what manner is Christianity idol worship, and if it is and it isn't, I once gave a shir on that, comparing it to Islam from the Jewish perspective. I never read their books, but from what halachic authorities have said about them. But at any rate, okay. So now Rav Yosef says, and this is what I was referring to earlier about books that didn't make it down to us, is B'Sefer Ben Sira. This B'Sefer Ben Sira Nami also Mikri. Even if the book of Ben Sira, I'll say what that is in a moment, the book of Ben Sira is not considered an external book to the point that one who reads it loses their share in the world to come, but nonetheless, it's forbidden to read Ben Sira. What is Ben Sira? So Ben Sira is a book written in the Second Temple period by someone who was clearly a scholar of Torah, and he wrote a book of, it's not clear exactly what the whole book is because we don't have all of it. They've recently found scraps of this book in its original Hebrew near Masada, and the book we have, or the parts of the books that we have, are translations written by those non-Jews who translated the Bible, and in the translations of the Bible included translations of this book Ben Sira as well. So Ben Sira is it's like a collection of homily / poetry / life lessons. That's what it seems what the book was, and the person who wrote it intended for it to be another book of Tanakh, like there's Mishlei, book of Proverbs, book of Ecclesiastes, which has like poetry / life lessons and things like that. So another book written by him, Ben Sira. It was like a collection of either his own ideas or a collection of things he has heard or popular sayings and things like that. So because he used biblical language, Lashon HaKodesh, he used the holy tongue, and he used also the syntax. It seemed like the syntax of his writing was similar to that of Scripture. So many Jews, it was very popular apparently at the time. It was very popular within the Jewish community in the Second Temple period, especially since the writer was a scholar. But because of whatever reason that the Gemara is about to discuss, the sages excluded it obviously they excluded it from Scripture, but they also kind of banned it from Jewish reading. Which is why, again, we don't have it in the original. The original Hebrew stopped being reproduced because the sages said this is out. So what made it was the translations. And the translations could be missing parts or got it wrong or whatnot. And now recently in the Masada they found some original things. Shtandas has a little write-up here about which translations incorporate lines that we find in the Gemara where the Gemara quotes Ben Sira, and which one doesn't. There's other books like this as well. There's Ben Sira, and there's
It's called Apocrypha, like the Signals Sefer Enoch is one of them.
a few other books that are written like that at the time, which the sages say are out. I can't remember other ones. The Gemara mentions them besides Ben Sira. Anyway, so that's this Ben Sira. So Rav Yosef is saying that even if it's not heresy per se, which the Gemara is going to discuss in a moment, even if it's not someone who reads it doesn't lose a share in the world to come per se, but it's still forbidden to read that book because the sages banned it. Okay.
To give reasons why it was banned?
Yeah, the Gemara is about to go do that.
Actually,
Rashi says, why? Because it's a waste of time, it's got silly stuff, and it leads to wasting Torah. So there's lots of books that have silly stuff, but I think the problem here is that it's silly stuff, but written in a way that it sounds like Torah, so the reader would think that it's holy.
Misleading,
it's misleading. In other words, reading a book of comedy is reading a book of comedy. No one has an illusions to think that this is something holy. But if someone read Ben Sira, because of the manner in which it's written, one might conclude that it's holy, and therefore, but really, in reality, it's just rubbish, and therefore it should not be read.
The irony is Ben Sira is quoted in the Gemara from time to time. There are good things in it.
Right here, the Gemara is about to quote a bunch of statements from Ben Sira.
But it's also the Gemara, not only here, but also the Gemara.
It's about the Gemara,
yeah.
Because he was a collector. It seems like he collected wisdom and old. So there was stuff that Jews had always taught their children that he put into writing. So they would quote him.
An early version of a magazine.
Yeah, but it's not.
Reader's Digest.
Yeah, but it wasn't uncommon. If you read you read other books from that era, from the Romans, it'll also be collections of sayings from this city, and this is what the elders of the city used to say, and then this is what the people of that city used to say. Is it not an uncommon thing for someone who had a good pen, who was rich enough to collect these sayings and put it down for posterity?
Little periodicals.
Sorry?
Little periodicals that they would.
Or just publish a book, period. Just publish a manuscript.
It's more like the Havdil, like Proverbs. Like Proverbs,
Yeah.
Each pasuk is by itself, really. It's not
All cities noted had books of chronicles of urban legends of their town to preserve their way of thinking and their way of life. This is a kind of version of that, but he used Lashon HaKodesh and biblical language, so it was misleading in that it sounded like this is Torah, and therefore the sages say out. Okay, it's not uncommon for people of that era to be writing that generally of different cities. Okay, like Greek mythology comes from writings that look similar to this, in which some guy writes down that this is what they used to say, this is what they used to say, and this is what they used to say, and a collection of things.
Was good, but he didn't actually introduce idolatry.
No idolatry, which is why it was misleading.
That's misleading.
Correct.
It looks like
it looks like actual Torah. I think example of this would be what's that guy who wrote a verse describing hell?
Dante.
Yeah.
Dante's Inferno.
Yeah, something similar to that.
Yeah.
Collecting what people believed about whatever in kind of verse form.
Yeah, what made it worse is obviously he was a scholar. That's worse. A Jewish
Correct.
scholar.
He was a Jewish scholar, contemporary of Shimon HaTzadik, and things like that. Okay, let's see. So Amalei Abaye said to Rav Yosef, "My time, what's the reason that the sages banned this book Ben Sira?" So now the Gemara is going to quote. It seems like they're not even quoting the original book, because this is Abaye. It comes many years later after Ben Sira is already gone. He's quoting a translation, right? He's not even quoting the original Hebrew. He's quoting a translation of the book, which I assume means that by the time Abaye came around, Abaye is towards the end of the Amoraic age. Ben Sira is early in the Mishnah, so you're talking about a span of a few hundred years between Ben Sira himself and Abaye, who's now talking. So I'm imagining that Abaye is speaking way after the ban, and therefore he doesn't even have the Hebrew necessarily. And therefore he's quoting the Aramaic translation of the Hebrew and asking Rav Yosef, why was this book banned? Kind of going back and try to deconstruct, reverse engineering why they came to the conclusion to ban the book. So Abaye says like this, and this is where I'm using Rabbi Steinsaltz because the fancy Aramaic here. So Abaye says, my time, what's the reason that this book was banned? If it's because Mishum Diksiv Ba, because it's written in it, like Timtesh Galidona Me'udne, the Lelezel Mashke L'Chavala, Ella, Tzale Yosef Benura, Va'achol Bei Terein Gritzim, which translates as, do not flay the skin of the fish from its ear, so that its skin does not cut to ruin, but roast it on the fire and eat it with 2 loaves of bread. Okay? So says Abaye, this sounds like rubbish, right? Maybe that's why they're banning it.
Maybe because it loses its context.
So let's see. So the Gemara, so Abaye says, pashte, but even pashte, if your issue is that it's the literal translation, where the literal translation is basically don't ruin the fish without eating it because you're going to be wasting it, right? You rip it open from its ears, you kind of destroyed half the fish. Rather, flame it nicely whole, and you can eat the whole thing. So in other words, the verse might be just a fancy way of saying, don't waste.
Yeah, as they say, waste not, want not. That's an American expression.
Waste not what?
Waste not, want not.
Waste not, want not.
Find that.
Never heard that.
Nope.
That's a common expression.
Yeah,
Common
okay.
expression in early America. It's about if it's Benjamin
Fish
Franklin.
has ears?
From what?
The fish has
Sure,
ears.
like the gills, I mean, like the.
I think, I guess it means the gills on the side of the head.
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah. So the Gemara asks, so says Rabbi, if your problem is the literal translation that says not to waste fish, but it's not because of the Torah also says don't waste. Don't destroy the trees. This is a reference to when the Jews are going to war, to battle, not to destroy trees unnecessarily. And from there we derive the law that one should not waste items. It's a whole set of laws not to waste, not to destroy things. So Ben Sira said it in a fancy way with some poetry about a fish and ears and ripping it, but it's made the same point. Don't waste stuff. And he's telling you, don't waste the fish. Fry the whole thing. Okay? So, that can't be the problem. Because the Torah also says not to waste, so what's the big deal? And then Abai says further, if you're going to say that's not literal meaning, the problem is the homiletic, expansive interpretation you're taking from it, the Mishnah is telling you, then Ben Sira would be telling you to behave like a mensch. Namely, the lelivo shalei kadarka, that one should not be with his wife in an unseemly way. What this means is, I find it nice what I say this, that one should not be intimate with his wife in the ordinary fashion, but rather use a different orifice that's nearby. This is referred to in the Gemara shalei kadarka, to engage with relations with his wife, not using the proper channel, excuse the pun.
Yeah. Good point. Thanks for it.
But that's the thing. That's what it means. So the Gemara is. So Abaye is saying, like, what's the problem with the statement? If you take it literally, it's telling you don't waste. Fancy way of saying it, but who cares? And if you're taking it interpretively, it's saying be respectful to your wife. Don't skin the fish in the wrong way, metaphorically. So, what's the problem? What's the wrong?
The reason fish is a symbol of Pruvaravo.
Fish are a symbol of multiplication. Yeah.
I've mentioned the fifth day and also for Shabbos, the same principle.
So, what's the problem with the statement? In other words, Abaye obviously is going through the book in the Aramaic and trying to deconstruct where the sages decided to ban this book. So Abaye suggests another verse that might be the reason for the banning. Ve'ela rather mishum deksiv because it says bas la'avia mitmunois shav befachta lelishin balayla. A daughter to a father is like a false treasure, meaning it's matmana shav, means like it's a treasure, it's a gift, but it's a bad gift because it keeps you up at night because you're so afraid of what's going to happen to your daughter. How's that? Bekatnusa, when she's a young child, shema tisfata, maybe she'll be seduced. Benarusa, when she becomes a young maiden, shema tizana, maybe she'll behave promiscuously. Bagra, when she grows older, shema leitinasa, maybe she won't get married. Nisis, if she gets married, shema leilabana, maybe she won't have children. Heskina, when she gets old, shema tasak shafa, maybe she'll become a witch. So a daughter it's a nice treasure, it's great you have a daughter, but oh my gosh, it's going to cause you trouble your whole life.
You always have to worry.
You always have to worry. Yeah. So this is the problem with it.
They say that's all this expression of the secular world.
Never. Mike has 3
problem,
daughters. I have 4 sons, or I'm okay.
The daughter brings them home.
That's 2 sons.
Yeah.
Sorry?
That expression of the secular world, the son solves his own problems. The daughter brings them back. Because you get, like, for example, pregnant.
So maybe this is the problem, says Abaye, that Ben Sira is writing this whole statement about your daughter keeps on making you worried. Says Abaye, but Rabbanan Amruah. The sages said a similar statement about daughters causing worry. Which is, quote from the sages. I'm going to quote directly, as is. Says our sages. The world cannot be sustained without males, but in the case without females, obviously, you need to reproduce. But nonetheless, praised is the one whose children are male. Woe is to the one whose children are female. Even though the world needs both. But you might prefer to have sons. Ben Zachar.
The Gemara says you need to have tanners, you need to have perfume.
Similar statement. Yeah. So, in other words, the daughters cause worry.
More of a liability.
Yeah. Just in parentheses, there's like a kind of play on the words here. The Gemara says Banav Scharim. So I translated Banav as children.
Yeah,
But Banav actually means sons.
Sons, exactly. Yeah.
So,
That's the drush.
so read it like this: praise is the one whose sons are male, and woe is to the one whose sons are feminine. Banav, the word Banav, literally means not children. That's the way I translated it. But if you translate it, actually literally means sons, as if to say his sons aren't men who can take care of themselves. Now you have a woe.
Something else.
Or something else. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's even worse. I'm going after women.
2019. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So says Abaye. Bottom line of Abaye saying is, that was a kind of a joke.
No,
But,
actually, your shouting is very good, man. That may have more made a mention as well.
like an allusion to that. Woe is to
Yeah.
the person
So
who's...
it says, his men going after men. It's interesting a twist. It could very well be
Yeah, it's
a
possible.
veiled reference to that.
Be careful, we thought police in the U.S. might grab us.
Yeah, no, it's true.
Might get banned from YouTube here.
Yeah,
I'm joking.
It's true. It's interesting a twist.
Anyway, the point being is, Abaye is saying that if the problem is because there have been warns against the worries of having daughters, okay, so do our sages. Children rearing is a stressful thing, and daughters are the same. Okay, says the Gemara, so says Abaye, okay, we have to find another verse that's the problem. Ela rather Mishum Teksiv, because it says, Loital dave belibach, the gave gvirin katel. Dave katel dave, which means don't bring anxiety into your life. Loital dave means worry. Don't bring worry or anxiety belibach in your heart. The gave gvirin, because the strongest of men, katel dave, can be killed from worry. You can die of worry, so take it out of your heart.
Right.
Of anxiety. This is actually, this is literally scientific nowadays.
Yeah, psychologically.
No, they used to believe it, and then when science went hardcore materialistic, they said, "Oh, anxiety is just in your head; doesn't do anything to your body." And now they're coming back to this physiological, holistic version of health, in which your mental health has a direct consequence on physical health, and thus, so much as you can, keep worry out of your mind, keep anxiety out of your head, so that you don't get unhealthy. So maybe, says Abaye, this is the problem. But Hashleima Amra, King Solomon said the same thing. Because King Solomon says in the book of Mishlei, 12:25, Daiga belev ish, one who has worry in his heart, Yisachena, he shall speak it out.
Or drive it out.
Yeah, we're going to say, well, Yisachena will... Yeah.
Go see your friendly psychiatrist.
No.
Actually, we'll see in a second. One second.
Avoid that.
One second. No. Why is that different?
No. But more has to go to a friend first and speak it out.
Ami Omer, why can't the psychologist be a friend? Ami Omer.
He's charging you.
He's charging you.
They actually say, like in the past, people didn't need psychologists. They had problems. They went to their family, extended families. And that was often enough, but the problem people know are alone. They have no one to go to.
I have a different understanding of that, but I think... let me finish the Gemara. I'll make a comment on that in a second. So it says the Gemara, Rab Ami and Rab Asi. Rab Ami and Rab Asi were discussing this verse, which says that King Solomon says that one who has a worry in his heart, Yishachena, he should put it out. What that means in a second. So Chad Amar Yishachena Medat. One says, remove it from your mind. Just distract yourself. You have worry, think about something else. You can choose what you think. It's one of the principles of Tanya, that a person can divert his attention even to that which he doesn't want to think about. So divert your attention. You're worried, divert your attention. Another one says, speak it over with somebody else. You got a worry in your heart, tell it to a friend, tell it to somebody else. This is lachem, to others, it doesn't say friend. So it could be someone you're paying also. But the point is, once you speak to somebody else, it becomes lighter on you, because you're sharing it with somebody else.
Supposed to give you advice, they can pray for you as well.
Even the Gemara doesn't say ask somebody else how to help you out. It doesn't say that. The point is, it's the very.
They can lead to that.
I know, but if we take it literally, and especially as we understand better mental health, we understand that literally speaking about it itself is helpful. One of the greatest parts of the worry is the biggest part of anxiety of any kind, to a large degree, is the sense that you're going through this alone, and when you share somebody else, you feel lighter already because you know somebody else is empathetic to you, understands you, and you don't feel as isolated. So, I don't know that it means not speaking to a professional. Why not? In terms of what you're saying before about, I think it goes both ways, which means like this. This is my own observation. I have no scientific data to back this up, but people always needed psychologists. They just didn't have them, so they suffered in silence to a large degree. Today, it's so proliferated and it's become a business. So, unfortunately, doctors, both of mental health and of physical health are incentivized to make you come back.
Sure, exactly. They have a vested interest. Yeah.
If a vested interest, you come back. 'Cause the more you come back, the more
More money.
money they'll make.
Money, exactly.
You
It
have
is-
health insurance?
Yeah, it doesn't take away from the fact that, in other words, a doctor also has a valid place, and the same thing's true of mental health. So this is something I've heard somebody else, and I think it's valid, which is the best way to go about these things is if you go in to begin with knowing what your goal is. Meaning, if you go in without a goal, you can be expected to be taken advantage of because you have no goal. So you're just going to go along for the ride for as long as it lasts.
I know a case like that.
But if you go in with a goal, I have X issue that I want to deal with. What's the plan of action? Takes 10 weeks, takes a year, takes 2 years, but you know there's an end goal and you get there. And once you're healthy, you can move on. And if you have a lapse, you come back. But otherwise, it could be indefinitely going further. Sorry?
To be sick all the time, to take just money all the time.
Yeah.
Money, medication.
This is after Hashem will measure.
Yeah,
You did that,
but
will
look,
finish.
today there's actually a swing the other direction. In the last, till about 10 or so years ago, the medical profession was more like take a pill, fix the problem, go home. And now there's much more holistic approaches to eating healthy, preventative medicine, eating healthy, eating diets. They figured a way to monetize that too, right? Which is good. Yeah, they monetized selling programs that keep you in shape before you come to the doctor, which is a good thing, right? So the market incentivizes all these things. At any rate, also say,
degrees. In some cases, people just need a good talk with a friend or the Rav.
Yeah.
Enough.
Yeah. So that's what I was.
So go to the doctor. No,
That was the other thing I wanted to say, which is
I agree. More serious case, you have to.
that was the other thing I wanted to say, which is I made the same introduction when we learned about depression in Tanya, which is that there is a difference between ordinary depression,
Ups and downs in life.
the ups and downs in life,
Everyone has
the equivalent of which would be popping a Tylenol, versus someone who has an actual mental health condition. Someone who has a mental health condition, you treat it the same way you treat a foot condition. You have a foot condition, you go to a doctor until it's fixed. You have a mental health condition, you go to a doctor until it's fixed. So I believe the same thing's true here. Talking to a friend and putting it out of your mind. It's talking about just regular anxiety. How am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to take care of this? How am I going to take care of that? Just normal stuff. Sorry? But all to say, getting back to our Gemara, this is still Abaya talking and trying to find what's the problem with Ben Sira.
What's the problem?
All these statements so far we found sources for it either in the sages or sources for it in the Torah itself. So what is
There's nothing new.
the problem?
In fact, interesting, he even goes
Should invite Sid.
And tomorrow, God willing, we're going to learn.
Send an invitation to Sid for tomorrow's share.
To Sid, yeah.
Hear from his side, his point of view.
So God willing, tomorrow we're going to hear more. Abaya is going to introduce more statements from Ben Sira and try to figure out what's the problem with this book called Ben
So
Sira.
this statement as well is not a reason why it should be banned, right?
That's what Abaya is saying.
Yeah.
They're trying to find what the problem is.
Trying to find what-
Yeah, so God willing, tomorrow we're going to learn more statements from Ben Sira, and we'll see what the Gemara has to say about it at the end. But I want to say something as well, which is interesting, which is, in a certain way, it's kind of ironic. Right? I mentioned before that the sages banned Ben Sira, and yet the Gemara quotes it.
Exactly.
Right? So as we're going to learn, the reason why the sages banned Ben Sira is because of its closeness to, we talked about it already, because of closeness to the Torah, etc. But we might suggest, I haven't seen this written anywhere, but I might suggest that whatever the sages themselves banned Ben Sira because of its negative adverse effects. Okay, they banned it. But the sages themselves understood that there's some wisdom in it. So the sages decided, you know what? Whatever's good, we'll incorporate it into our text while keeping it away from being canonized as part of the Bible, which is what people wanted to do. Collected wisdom from the Jews, Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, and Ben Sira. Let's just put it into the list. And the sages didn't want that. So the sages, okay, we're going to ban it completely. Now, whatever is valuable, we'll take it and incorporate it in our text. And that's what you have here. So it's interesting. In the Gemara's discussion about what makes Ben Sira right and wrong, you also have, by the by, teachings from Ben Sira that are valid. So they've kind of, they've elevated, if you will, whatever elements of Ben Sira that's good, they've elevated it by incorporating that into the Gemara.
Only in the Gemara or in the books?
Nothing made it to the Bible, because that was the point. It should not.
Well, you said you keep the good, so there's.
But so keep the good in here.
Only
Keep the good without letting anybody think this is canonized as part of Tanakh. By putting it in the Gemara's conversation, and by keeping it in the Gemara in such a way where the Gemara is discussing why it shouldn't be learned, while the person's like us right here, we're getting the wisdom from Ben Sira, but none of us are going to make the mistake of thinking that this is part of the canonized Bible, because it's being written in the context of the Gemara discussing why it's not part of the Torah. So we've avoided the problem while maintaining whatever wisdom is necessary, is valuable. And perhaps what the Gemara is doing here. Why is the Bible going through 10 examples? You get to the point. Because perhaps he's trying to preserve the wisdom for us without us confusing it and thinking that it's part of the canonized Torah. Perhaps I haven't seen it written anywhere, but it seems to be logical.
That's what the commentaries say, that there are
Yeah.
that's why you have something quoted by Tzira just by itself, not just more else more. Just
Yeah,
Ben Tzira.
but without leading the mistake of
But when you
thinking.
said, when the sages said that we'll keep some of the ones that are.
They haven't said that anywhere, but I'm saying
They don't
by
say
dint of the fact that the Gemara, by dint of the fact that the, by dint of the fact that the Gemara quotes it here,
and elsewhere as well.
it indicates to me that whatever wisdom they felt was necessary, they preserved.
preserved, but only in the.
Right here, in what we did today, we spent a half hour reading Ben Sira.
Yeah.
Right, so they preserved that for us while simultaneously avoiding the mistake that we might think that this is part of the text of the Bible. Perhaps.
It's like Meir Nachar, eat the fruit and spit out the pits.
But the Gemara is doing that for us here.
Exactly what it's doing for us.
Yeah.
So there was wisdom.
Okay, have a wonderful day,
Bring a
everybody.
proof from the Torah, from the Tuvim, and from the Gemara. So you had to cover the whole base. That
That's interesting. There's going to be more statements tomorrow.
Yeah, they covered all the bases.
Okay, have a wonderful day, everybody.